Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. I want to welcome you back to another exciting, scintillating episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Hey, I'm loving season 9, and, our theme is that black enough for you? And so, everybody's talking about DEI, and they want us to bring culture and color and flavor to the table. But when we show up in all of our blackness, ta-da, sometimes people want us to, I don't know, like, when's enough? When's too much? When is it over the top? And so I love capturing this whole idea, is that black enough for you? Because through our discussions, we're just making a point of just bringing up black perspectives and things that we think about, things that make you go, black. Those of you who are listeners, you might be too young to remember that segment on the Arsenio Hall show. That was Arsenio, wasn't it? Things that make you say, go, which I love. Somebody needs to bring that back. I'm gonna do that with some type of cultural twist. Would that be okay, Jeremy?
That would be fine, Reverend.
Mm-hmm. White things that make you go, Oh my goodness. And so thank you all for tuning in today. Now, as I've been mentioning in each episode, this is the 10th anniversary of the front page essay that I wrote in 2013 entitled Justified Anger. And so the article that I think has been redropped, I was asked to write another piece that if you haven't had, we'll put a link to it in this episode as well, just so that you can just see the follow-up piece and how things have changed or not changed, or how I've changed in this process. And what I'm doing is bringing some of the players who were around back in the day to just talk about the process, relive it for me, because I think it really is worth commemorating. Because if you don't mark history, you can forget that it's happened and you can repeat it. But if you don't remember history, you can neglect celebrating strides that you have made. And even though the whole ecosystem of Dane County, Wisconsin, or the Midwest, or even the United States of America for that matter, have not changed, I've changed, and people are changing, and leaders are changing, and we are making motion. But it takes more than just us moving in a vacuum. We need all of us to move. So I'm bringing people in to just talk about that process. And so today, my guest is a person that you've heard from before. It's Dr. Karen Reece. She works for me at the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. She's one of our vice presidents. She's the vice president for research and education. She holds a PhD in physiology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison from the School of Medicine and Public Health. She began her career as a research scientist in academic and biotechnological settings. She's really been part of Justified Anger's strategic thinking and planning since its inception 9-10 years ago, and has become a trusted colleague. And she brings special skills, particularly when it comes to thinking about the metrics that are used to show the success of programming like ours that's not normally measured successfully by Black people. And so not only do we have to create the work, but we had to really create some new metrics and measuring opportunities and strategies to really capture the beauty and the depth of the work of Justified Anger and of Nehemiah. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Dr. Reece, welcome back to Black Like Me. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing great.
All right. It's so great to have you here. So listen, let's just jump right into it. Grits or cream of wheat?
Neither.
This is going to be a long day.
But if I did eat grits, it would be with butter and sugar.
Well, that was very okay. That was very redemptive. That was extremely redemptive. A little cunning, but very, very redemptive. I like that. Okay, all right. Dr. Reece, how long have you been white?
My whole life, since I was born, I believe.
Since you were born. Maybe even before you were born.
Possibly,
That's where it all
yes.
started, girl. You know
Possibly.
where it all started. Oh, my goodness. How long have you lived in Madison?
My whole life, born and raised.
Great. And your parents, were they from this area?
Yeah, my mom is born and raised in Madison as well. My dad
right.
is close to Madison, but from a town called Verona, just outside of Madison.
Outside.
Yep.
And you lived for a while in a home that your great-grandfather
I did. Yep.
built.
My grandfather built it. And my mom currently lives in a home my great grandfather built.
Wow. And it's probably like a block or two from where I grew up. So it's
It
part
is,
of
yep.
part of South Madison. So that's just really cool how that lineage and how those things work. And so listen, we're here. We're going to be talking about something that I'm hoping will excite you. We're going to have some good conversation around these issues. And so I'm curious. Do you remember where you were when Justified Anger dropped?
I do.
Really?
It was actually Nehemiah's Christmas party where we go out every year and to a restaurant. We eat a lot of breakfast. We have fun. We sing. We do gift exchange. And we were sitting back after the meal. People are starting to leave. And I was like, oh, we were talking about the article drop today. And so I pulled out my phone and like, let me just pull it up so I could share it with
Sure.
folks. And I noticed that at 10:30 in the morning, it already had hundreds of shares and thousands of views. And I got like this feeling in the pit of my stomach, like, oh no.
Oh no! What did he do now?
I didn't know what it meant, but it was going to be something.
Wow! And it was this huge to do, because I'm reflecting fondly upon this. I had a consultant who was trying to coach me through this work. She was a nonprofit leader in the area. Reached out to me like hundreds of others saying, I want to help you. But she made it very clear this cannot be part of Nehemiah. This cannot be part of what it is that you're doing. So when we called the town hall meeting that took place in February of a few months after that, she said, under no circumstances can this be connected. And so at the last minute, I tied it in to Nehemiah because I needed it to be anchored somewhere. But it was just this huge thing of the community wanting to talk to someone that was debunking the Madison myth that life is equally great here for everyone. But man, I just remember the sparks, the fireworks, the energy, the interest, the hope, the dismay. I never want to live through that again. I mean, it was very exciting. You know me, I'm not shy. I don't mind the stage, the camera, but I was not ready for community-wide response. And in my adult life, in my career in this community, I've not seen an article written. I might have seen interviews, but not an article written that just pulled on so many levers. Were you at the town hall meeting?
I was, yeah, I was helping with AV for that. And it that happened in a whirlwind as well. Because,
sure.
This unfolded between December 18th of 2013 and February 13th. So that's a couple months dealing with this inundation with phone calls and emails and people stopping by our office.
All right.
And you said, we got to do something. And it was the town hall. And it was just surreal.
Oh, my goodness.
Seeing all the people show up.
My goodness. And so I have this one photo that I used for the presentation when we had a celebration of the 10th anniversary recently. And I don't think I went into depth on this, but I showed someone's hands holding hundreds of reply cards because someone thought, we better have these reply cards to ask people, you want to capture the names. I was smart enough to capture the names. And so much was going on in 2013. One, we had just built a new wing of our church. And we used that as an auditorium. We built it as an auditorium. And so we had this crazy overflow. We knew that we needed to create a database. I knew that was important. My friend Joe helped to put something together. He mentioned to me that we were trending on Twitter, and I didn't even know what that meant. It's like, oh, that's nice. What does trending mean? Because me, trending takes like a couple of months. It's usually, attributed to the latest fashion out of Paris or something like that. These are the latest trends. And so I didn't know what it meant that we were trending, but we were smart enough to at least put up a hashtag and say, hey, if you like this, please tweet these things out. So there was so much that we were on top of. But Karen, there were hundreds of those cards of people saying they want to do something. Now, of course, we're going to get into the thickness of to the thick of things. A murder, a shooting, a news event, an activity, a town hall meeting. A lot of these things do start this big spark, and people want to do something. but we know that that doesn't always last. But I just want to pause for a moment and say, but people did come out because many wanted to hope or to think that something different could happen. But many of them didn't think that any part of the problem was theirs to own or theirs to address or theirs to fix.
Right.
And so I think I just want to just say, one, I acknowledge the folks who came out. I acknowledge the people who showed up. I know sometimes when I'm talking, with folks, I mentioned, Senator Ron Johnson came in, and sometimes, depending on people vote and their background, they'll be like, what? What was he doing? I said,
Right.
well, he showed up.
Right.
A lot of other people didn't.
And the amazing thing about that is we had all ages. I mean, they were, people in their early 20s to people who have lived in Madison for decades, and 65 plus, who were in the audience and we had a time to share out. They did some speaking. We had predominantly white people show up, but we also had people of other races and a good percentage of Black people show up to give their comments and to speak into it. So I think especially for it being a mainstream event, to have that kind of diversity in the room and diversity of thought as well.
And so when you have an event like this, and I mentioned this in my new article that's called Anger and Courage. I said, if you have an idea, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what I wrote. But in essence, I said, if you have an idea in a place like Madison and you challenge the status quo, you better damn well be sure to have a plan, the ability to fix your community and to appease the broader community while the broader community watch you work, saying, no, not that way. You don't do it like that. You don't do it like this. And so you have to pull all these things together. So then I'm a visionary. So pulling together 600 people on a whim because you just say, I want to have a town hall meeting, showing up is successful. But I am smart enough and married enough to an implementer to know, oh, crap.
Right.
Someone's going to have to read these cards, enter these cards, categorize these cards, follow up with these people, give them something to do. And then now people are beginning to ask me, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And this is where you and I really started working closely together. And because your work is really again, it's been in biotechnology and it's been in academic settings. So I don't even know how we got on the subject that you knew how to think about creative or unorthodox measuring styles or systems for capturing the kind of work that we were going to do. But somehow we landed on that discussion because you may remember this. I was so tempted to follow the way of so many other organizations. Well, let's go create social service programs. Let's see how many people we can get to a after school program. Let's see how many people we can get to a job training program. There was pressure to create programs, but not to really figure out what the problem was, to figure out the solution. Well, you couldn't figure out a solution unless you fully understood the issue. And as a scientist, I think that's what you understood. If you're going to start talking about how you fix things, what the prognosis is, well, we haven't even diagnosed the issue yet. And so, do you remember those early discussions where you were trying to just remind me to breathe? Let's take time to think about what it is you got to do and what we want to capture. And let's not trip over ourselves in doing what the funders want us to do because they're doing what they typically do, but they may not know any better. And so how do you not fall for that bait? Do you remember those discussions?
And that was also a response to some of the things people said in that town hall and wrote on those cards, because people were saying, we've been talking about this for decades, tired of it, we need to do something different. And so part of it was, this has been going on long enough. We don't have to rush to a thing to do. Let's take some time and see if we can figure out what would it look like to do it differently.
Right. And when you have a moment like that, there's so many factors, there's so many indicators. I had a rift with that consultant because we just had a difference of opinion. They wanted to just assert themselves into the core of those Black leaders and Black influencers, and she got really upset because I would have meetings with them without telling her. Because she said at some point they're going to have to get used to meeting with me. But it's interesting, when you and I start working together, you never once demanded that you be in that place. Now, again, it wasn't like you were on the back of the bus as a white woman. It wasn't like, well, Karen, you can't come to these places. But you understood, when my expertise is needed, I know how to come in and implement.
Right.
But the Black community has got to think this through because they are the ones that are being targeted. Well, then you do something different. You all work together. You all create a reality. And so that's interesting that you didn't fall into that space, but that you gave us room to do what we needed to do. But I'm curious, do you and your mom ever joke about the fact that she named you Karen 23 years ago when you were born, that she named you Karen, and that was going to become a moniker, that was going to become sort of a meme, and your real name is Karen, like your government name is Karen. And so when Karen came online as the quintessential white woman that was doing in the Black community by weaponizing them tears and her cellular data plan and her camera, did you chuckle at that?
Oh, yeah.
Did you cry around that? Like, did you think, like, why couldn't her name be Tiffany? Why in the hell do they have to call her Karen? Did you and your mom joke about that?
Yeah, we do in my family, and it's just hilarious to me. I mean, we tried Susan, we tried Patty, and for some reason Karen just stuck. So
wait, they tried Susie and Patty before that?
Yeah, yep. There were a couple incidents, and then Karen's the one that held. So okay, you know what? Let's go. Let's own it.
Oh, that is really, really. Man, that is funny. So let me just stay here for just a moment. That moniker is somewhat accurate. I know it's it's easy to take something like that, like a meme, and turn it into a caricature. Where I think the basis of that is to exaggerate, but at its core, particularly since we're working in human services, it is largely dominated by white women.
It
I
is.
know Laleda, my sister, speaks into this a little bit, but I guess if you could just help us as an insider's perspective, how have we focused so much on the man? We haven't given him a name. We haven't called him Billy Bob. We haven't called him Mikey. We haven't given him Biff. I don't know. We haven't given the man a call. I guess it's just sufficient to call him the man. But how did Karen go under radar for so long? Because Karen ain't no joke.
Right. Yeah. Karen means business and comes in with what she thinks should be done.
Karen ain't playing.
She's not. She is not.
That might be a great deal.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Karen. I didn't mean to cut you up. But so she's not playing, but she does fly under the radar. And again, when we say these kinds of things, listeners, we're not demonizing people, or this is where we have real conversations. So we're not going to spend half the program trying to put the disclaimers. But I think, and again, we hear this a lot, that we look at educational programming, social services, two places from which pipelines into prison and juvenile corrections flow. It is heavily dominated by white women who do not seem as threatening as the man. But the man is not necessarily interacting in the lives of kids. And so I think it's a newer phenomenon that we're talking about, but just a response of white women to that concept.
Yeah, and it's been, I mean, amongst my peers, I think people see it as funny and as you know, this is one of those societal things that happens. Sure. But I've seen really extreme responses to the point of white women saying this is the equivalent of the N-word.
No,
really,
she didn't. Karen said that.
Yeah,
was she
did.
Crying? Was she crying when she said it?
She was, and she wanted to speak to the manager.
Oh, that Karen with a capital K.
Yes.
She wanted to speak to the manager.
Yeah, she did. But I think...
want to speak to your God. I want to speak to your God.
Yes. But I think there's a lot of layers to that. One reason that personality is flown under the radar is partly because we didn't have smartphones and couldn't capture this kind of behavior for all the world to see. So that's one element that brought it out, and it allowed people who no one believed previously, like, here is the visual evidence of what's going on. That makes a big difference. And I think in the social services field, it's, you know, we've talked before about the dynamic between racism and sexism and what that means between white women and black men, and how we've all tried to compensate, the assumptions we make. And so I think for white women in social services, this is a place where they were able to gain leadership roles and, you know, be able to make decisions and start running programs. But then that also allowed them to sit with data and bias that made them think a certain way about the majority of people they were serving.
That's really insightful. I mean, it's one thing to sit around with Black people and talk about Karen. It's another thing to sit around with Karen.
And my
And
name's
talk about
Karen, so I can say this.
And you can say this. My name is Karen, and I'm not just a spokesperson. I'm a customer. No, that you've observed this, because you're right. While white men were climbing the corporate ladders, places where, and not that white women weren't excelling, but we know that they're excelling slower in corporate America, in the academic world, but in social services,
Right.
and in educational services. It's, if you see a Fortune 500 company and it has a female CEO, and it's not Mattel, and it's not Mary Kay or something, but it's a bank or something, you think,
Right.
but if a woman is the head of a university, you don't. It's not as novel. Like, oh, okay, yeah, sure,
Right.
because you just see it. You see it a lot. But it's very interesting. And so the reason I want to say this to our listeners, the reason why we're talking about this is that when people show up at events and fill out cards to ask, who can I help, who can I serve, who can I mentor, there's never a pause to just think, do I need to do any work? Is there anything
Exactly.
from which I must divest myself, or how do I not contribute to the problems? We bring these things up because these are the real issues. If you look on social media, if you do see, say maybe a white male doing Karen-like antics, he's often inebriated or gets into some type of fight situation where
Right.
things might just go awry, but not necessarily the face of, I'm going to call the police because you're parked here, because you're sitting here,
Right.
or because you're walking your dog, or because you're doing these kinds of things. And so it does begin to paint a picture of, and we're not going to just focus on Karenisms, but I think it's important to have this discussion, because when Nehemiah had this breakthrough about justified anger, the major person who went to the funders and said, Alex is not letting us come to the table. He's not sharing resources. He's not telling us what he's doing. When I kept saying, I need time to meet with Black people, we got to get our agenda together, it was a white female CEO who went to my funders
Right.
and basically said, he's not playing fair in the sandbox. It's a Black issue, came on the heels of Race to Equity, talking about the issues facing Black people with disparity. We needed to come up with our own solution. You're running your own agency, and you're running, if this were a political campaign, you're running on the ticket of ending these kinds of issues.
That's right.
So why do you need me to bring you to the table? So then I had to have a conversation with the funders about why I wasn't letting her play in the sandbox,
Right.
when I was trying to hear from Black people.
Right. When she hadn't let you play in the sandbox.
Oh, did she even have a
Before that,
sandbox?
exactly.
Oh, that's right. I didn't even know. It was
Exactly.
rooftop, so I didn't even know she had a sandbox. And I wasn't invited anywhere near it.
That's right.
And neither were the Black women. Mm-hmm. Renee and Nisi and Tasha and them.
Right.
There might have been one or two tokens, but they weren't over there running stuff, even though many of the clients reflected that demographic. And so that was one thing that we had to wrestle with. The other thing was it was very innovative. It was very grassroots. But we found, if you remember, Dr. Reece, we had to create new language because we didn't want to overuse grassroots, because that
Right.
just sounds like, does that sound like second rate, second fiddle? Is that what you call folks if they're not sophisticated enough? And we had to figure out
Top down versus bottom up.
exactly, like we had to just look at different things and think about the strategy, because honestly, because we were talking about a new way of doing things, the Black community was not necessarily adept at doing this either. I mean,
Right.
our mentors remember the traditional civil rights movement. They remember their parents and grandparents talking about the days they marched with King. That generation had infiltrated boardrooms and Ivy Towers, and they were the first and the only in many state and nonprofit organizations. We were talking about really changing the way these systems, dismantling many of these systems, which is a different strategy,
Right.
because we had older than us, the Black folks who infiltrated that by moving into neighborhoods, getting advanced degrees, coming up from the South and from larger cities, living in Wisconsin. Next to us, we had younger black folks who wanted to keep it real, and they were shutting stuff down. From
Right.
traffic to stuff downtown to traffic on the highway. We were in the middle thinking, all right, how do we empower the folks that we have? How do we help people who are white who would be allies? Because we've got folks helping black people, but who's helping to hold the feet of white people, the feet of white people to the fire, and understanding the internal change that must take place in order to move this agenda ahead? And that's sort of the lane that we chose. That we do both,
Right.
and we would develop capacity within black influencers, whether they were established or emerging, but that we would hold white people accountable, whether they were judges, other elected officials, heads of nonprofits, chair people of nonprofits. And holding that ground together was something that you don't see a lot of folks do. If you're an activist organization, you don't offer programs. And if you're a program-driven organization, you're not necessarily known as activists. So do you remember us like sort of taking that sweet spot of doing a little bit of both?
Well, and there's another layer in there where activists are generally responding in the moment, putting out fires and issues that come up, they're speaking out against that. But there's another lane that focuses on the long-term systems change. And, so you've got the three things. You've got programs and services, you've got activism and current events, and then you've got long-term systems change. And so that was kind of our pushback there. Programs are important. Nehemiah has run many successful programs for years. People need help. They need services.
Right.
But all these decades of services have not changed the racial disparities.
Right.
Your article was not about new data. These are things that our graduation rate in the Madison School District has been low since the 70s, and there are news articles about this. So it's so how are we going to change that system? How are we going to change how education works and operates so that we don't have to keep funding the same programs decade after decade, and we can make a difference?
And that was novel. That was new for folks. That systems change. Like, why aren't you out there working with black people? Why aren't you out there changing grade point averages? Why aren't you out there working with these black folks in the trenches? Why are you spinning your wheels working with white people who we call would-be allies? Because we didn't hand out that badge too easily. And so we found, so that's the lane we chose. That we want to focus on systems change. Well, if the strategy is unique, then maybe it requires a unique measurement tool, a measurement process.
Right.
So we ran into this buzzsaw of evidence-based practices. Let's look at, you probably can do a better job of giving us like a 5-second definition of evidence-based practices.
Yeah, so evidence-based practice is important in general because we want to make sure that we're doing things that actually work. And so that term comes from when there's a program that exists, what can happen is researchers will come in, look at how the program operates, evaluate the outcomes and the results, and report back on whether or not the program is doing what it says it's going to do. And that's often called validation when you do that with the program. And so when people come up with new ideas, we want to make sure that they're drawing from what's done before so that what they come up with and what we're funding is going to be beneficial and not harmful. And so it helps us to overcome our bias by using things that are documented. But the problem is that the work that Nehemiah has done and many, many other Black-led organizations have not been studied, have not been evaluated, and have not been allowed in that literature base, which is what we call the evidence. So we don't have all the evidence. We don't have the full picture.
We have the white evidence.
We do. Yes, we have a lot of white evidence.
And so not only did I assert with the article Justified Anger about how Madison's black community is being failed, then we create a different strategy that they're not used to seeing black organizations take. I mean, we're bringing together hundreds of people. We've got thousands of shares, and so we've got the attention of the community, and no one's speaking for us. Like we've been given this platform. I remember Cap Time saying to me, and it makes sense. I mean, I love the folks over there, and we've developed a friendship over the years. But I remember how I real naively stated after the article went viral, then they had me write a couple of other pieces. They were interviewing me around other stuff, and I said, it's so nice to have this platform, to share things that I have. And they said, this newspaper is not your platform. I realized I'd overstepped, I've overreached. And it's not. I understand that. And I realized that what I was saying was a little, naive and maybe egotistical, but it's been 10 years. And when they want something salient written around race, who do they come and talk to? Who do they call? Who do they text?
That's right.
And so I get that it's not my platform, but I think they also weren't used to a Black voice having such a crossover appeal to their audience. They weren't.
That's right.
They weren't used to that. Didn't mean that was my platform, but I think I realized that they tried to find other Black voices to kind of say things. It didn't have the same kind of traction because they hadn't grown up here. They didn't have the same stories
right.
and the same experiences. But as they continued to give us platform to talk about the things that we were doing, it caused them and others to say, well, what are you going to do and how you're going to measure it?
Right.
And then how do you know that it's successful? And if we had used some of the, evidence-based practices that they were thinking about, they could have easily said that what we were doing was failing. And in fact, some of them
Right.
even insinuated that we were failing.
Yeah, and it's, that's really the approach pushing for programs or initiatives. Most of our funding cycles come out in 1-year terms. And so you essentially have to solve a major problem in the scope of a year. And either you report positive outcomes or you don't get funded next time unless you have a really, really good reason. And the problem with this is when you're doing innovation, you need time to come up with the idea and the plan. We needed time to not necessarily identify the root cause because you and other leaders had identified, a lot of the root causes of the state that we're in. But how do we put this on paper? How do we state it? What's happened before and what has worked before, what hasn't worked, and how we're going to reconfigure so we can create something that will work. And you can't do that in a week. You can't do that in one meeting. You need time to sit, think. Ideation is a big part of the corporate world right now. We have rooms all over corporate America that have comfy chairs and games and silly putty so that people can sit and think.
Wow.
To come up with the money-making ideas. And that's what we needed.
And see, and this is a huge plug for why even Black-led organizations need to really think about how to diversify in terms of ethnicity and experiences and disciplines. Because as you said that, I thought, okay, this white lady's up in here from the academy where people just want to sit and have lofty thoughts. Kids are dying in the street. We got to get stuff going. We got to get stuff done. But what you were saying was true. That knee-jerk reaction that we got to produce, it's not just because hell was breaking loose in the Black community.
Right.
And while it's breaking loose, people are saying, come on, what's your solution?
That's right.
Come on, what are you going to do? What do you think about this? Do you see this? Are you going to do something? Because you sure as hell criticized us. So come on, come on. And so the idea of pushing back and saying that we're going to take time to really think about this was daunting. Because it made, after you and I talked about it, it sort of made sense. I didn't fully agree, but I said, okay, it's an option. I'm a visionary, so I can plan programs overnight, but I do the right programs. And while I'm planning programs, do I plan their measurement? No, I don't. I just think about how it's going to play out. I don't think about the budget and, is this, will we have the staff for doing this for a year? So the time to think this through, the time to think this out was such a gift. But we had to really, really push because people felt that they were wasting their money if we thought about things. Just because we experienced it on a daily basis doesn't mean that we were ready to enact a plan to fix it. Now in our 9th season, our award-winning podcast has a reach throughout the United States of America and over 80 countries around the world. Just want to give a quick shout out to my dedicated team of people who are helping me to change the conversations around race. Now, when you support Black Like Me podcast, you are supporting the work that they are doing to help me in creating better quality content, better marketing strategies, bigger and better production, a better interactive experience, but more importantly, a better society through the impact and the work of people who listen to this podcast. You can just click the link below to see the various levels of support that we offer and decide what works for you. Now, those of you who become patrons of this podcast, you'll have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, video chats with me. You'll also have a chance to join conversations with me via Zoom with other people around the country about the subject of race. To become a patron, again, all you've got to do is click the link below and you can support these important conversations and the work that this podcast is doing. I want to thank you in advance.
There's a bunch of layers to that. I mean, one is that, you're saying you can do it better, so let's see it. Let's do it then.
Right.
Otherwise,
That's
let
exactly.
just get out of our way and let us keep doing what we're doing. I mean, in addition to that, there's the threat of, power shifting and people that have certain positions. And that was potentially what the consultant was thinking is you're stepping on my toes. You're encroaching on my territory, my funding. And then what does that mean for me, not only as whatever I'm doing for my job,
Right.
but also for my livelihood and my respect as a professional in the field. What does that mean? And then as a white woman, then you have all these things bubbling up to say, well, do I really know what I'm talking about? Are they saying I don't know what I'm talking about? Is that an insult to me? And how do I combat that? And that all comes into play. I think the biggest thing for me that I saw at the beginning, first of all, I have to give credit to the seed funding that we did get. I think it was around $100,000
Yes,
in
it was.
the beginning, because there weren't upfront strings attached to that. It was, here's an idea, and we know that you need to figure something out. But I was really shocked because I had worked with enough nonprofits throughout my life. Even though I was in the sciences, I had volunteered different places. And what really shocked me once I was seeing it from the inside of a Black-led organization is 3 months after the town hall meeting, people were coming to you saying like, okay, what have you got?
Yes,
and it's
they
like,
were.
we just you said, I just caught up on my rest from all of this whirlwind and we're just getting settled in here. And then it was another inquiry at 6 months and 9 months. And it was this pressure to produce when I hadn't seen that happen at any of the other organizations that I had been affiliated with.
You're absolutely right. Let me just take a moment because I don't think I've done this on record, but those organizations were CUNA, now called True Stage, Madison Community Foundation, EVU Foundation, and Madison Gas and Electric.
That's right.
Foundation. Those foundations came around and you're right, gave dollars to say, all right, create something. Think about this. Now, we did create a plan, a snapshot of what the Black community said needs to happen in order to prove that the needle is moving. But we're very, 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 very careful to not call it a report.
Right.
Because we didn't want to compare it to the Race to Equity report. And we also didn't want to write anything that sounded like we were going to then fix this ourselves.
That's
and so
right.
we called it the Our Madison plan. It's about an 80-page plan. We'll put a link to this where we listened to hundreds of Black influencers. And it's probably the most comprehensive snapshot of the Black community by the Black community in Madison's
Absolutely.
history. And it was Black-led, beautifully designed, beautifully written. And a lot of the things happened. Even
Right.
though we did not make it happen, we just articulated that this needs to take place. So around this time, we're working, we're listening, we're breathing. People are saying we want reports, we want reports. We also had issues, and I won't name this entity, and it's not a foundation, but there was an entity that gave us, I think, $20,000. Mm-hmm. And in the fine print, and I'm not a fine print reader, but Karen is. The fine print basically said that whatever work we do out of that funding belongs to that entity.
Right.
And you told me that's like, wait, no, that can't, no. So for $20,000, everything that I'm doing, the Our Madison plan, these gatherings, these listening sessions, it belongs to the city of Madison. Oops, I said it. To the city of Madison? And I remember you refused to sign it. Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, well, just people.
Am I getting that correctly?
You are, yeah, and it might have been 25,000, but the important thing for listeners to realize is that that clause about work product and intellectual property is actually really common in boilerplate contracts, particularly with government agencies or academic institutions. So you need to read every clause in your contract before you sign it, or you might lose your work.
Or if you're a part of an agency or foundation that's funding Black-led work or people
That's
of color-led work, one of the things that you can do as an ally is take a look for that boilerplate language and remove it ASAP.
Right, because it doesn't make sense. And So yeah, I saw
Oh,
that.
it makes sense. It just ain't fair.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So I saw that, and I was still pretty new at Nehemiah. So I came to you and said, I don't like this, and you said, well, challenge it. And so
Be a Karen.
Be a Karen.
Snap.
Innovation.
That's right.
But yeah, so we pushed back, and it wasn't as difficult to get it removed as I thought it would be. It took a couple weeks, and they just completely removed it, didn't modify it, just took it out of the contract. But if we hadn't seen that, who knows what might have happened later.
So Dr. Reece, what does that mean potentially? Like, what could the city have laid claim to?
Now, a lot of people will tell you, oh, don't worry about it because it never matters.
Of course.
But it never matters until it does.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be, for example, if, we had done some work using that specific money, we wrote a curriculum or we wrote a book about it, and then you wanted to sell that book and make money off of it, they could potentially lay claim to it. Because, or they could take the curriculum and use it and find someone, give it to someone else in the city to use that curriculum because under the contract they own it. And so we would use the rights to that, the potential income, if any, and then also the ability to shape it. And, they could change anything they wanted to.
And dozens of organizations have signed those clauses without understanding that at any point the city could come back and lay claim on that. Now, while we're working together, some other groups started popping up. Nothing against them. They started popping up, and they were bringing together probably a more broad-based group of African American leaders. I remember thinking, okay, I know those folks. We're friends with them. We're not competing with them, but it does look like we have different types of coalitions that's going on. Maybe we should merge. Maybe we should do something like that. Like they're writing proposals together. They're making statements together. We're listening, we're thinking. And so I remember just getting nervous and saying, I don't know. I don't know, Karen. I think, there's a lot of energy. They're writing articles about them now. They're talking about them now. They're referring to them now. We can't find them now.
Right.
They're doing other things outside of that group. But what we have seen is that many times associations or groups or gatherings will start, but if they're not planning for the long game, they're not really around.
Right. Energy fizzles, when an incident pops up, and this was also around the same time where Mike Brown was murdered in St. Louis. And so there was a lot of uprising around that. There were a lot of things going on during that time.
Yes.
And so people get excited. We saw this again during the pandemic. People get really excited. They give money. They put in time and energy. But if you don't plan for long term, you can't give that energy indefinitely. And so you got to figure out how to pace yourself. It's like a sprint or a marathon. Right. And if we're going to actually make change, it's got to be the marathon approach.
Sure.
We don't want to burn out, or we want to be ready to pass the baton.
Right. As we continue doing this work, we had a huge rollout at the Expo Center. About 900 people showed up. Cap Time sponsored that. They wanted to sponsor the town hall meeting. We said, no, it's too soon. We need to own this. That's got to be Black space. But they did pay for that event. They sponsored it.
Did.
900 people showed up. And I remember, we pulled that beautiful plan together. We had it queued up. You remember this? And I said, all right, Karen, when I give you the nod, we're going to send it to everyone who registered electronically.
Yep.
So I remember being on stage saying, hey, if you registered, look at your phones now. And it just dropped in their stuff. So I just thought, okay, that was
pretty cool.
That was such a cool moment. Got us more attention because we talked a little bit about the plan, but people then wanted us to carry out that plan.
Right.
They wanted us, and some more dollars came in there for long range, for some long range action and planning. But around that same time, we were introduced to Professor, I get his name right, Randy
Stoker.
Randy Stoker.
Yeah.
He introduced us to one of his PhD candidates.
Right.
Who's African American.
Greg Wilson.
Thank you for stating his name. Who's doing research about the levels of difficulty in raising money for Black-led causes if you're a Black CEO. That if there's a certain degree of raising money for those issues, in general, you add a Black person at the helm, it makes it even more difficult. Now, those of us who are Black and in these nonprofit circles felt it, but when someone writes a PhD dissertation around some of this information, it makes you think, dang, I'm not crazy. This is really happening. And can you just give us just a brief overview of some of what Dr. Wilson's research was saying and how it resonated with our work? Because he was talking about how we would have a tougher time raising money for this kind of work than perhaps a white-led organization gathering data on the Black community.
That's right. And this is information, again, not new data. It's just coming up again. And so Dr. Wilson put together, believe he's Dr. Wilson now,
I think so.
put together a study where he interviewed nonprofit leaders, Black nonprofit leaders, and kind of asked some questions around funding and practices to really, dive into this problem.
I'm sorry, can I say something, Dr. Reece?
Yes.
I was one of those that he interviewed, but he said to me, hey, this has come up. I'll keep you anonymous because many of the Black CEOs are afraid to say their names.
That's right.
For fear of repercussion, for telling the truth.
Exactly.
About how funding works in this very progressive community. I just wanted to say that people participated, but they were afraid to say their names.
And that probably means that fewer people participated than there could have been.
Exactly.
And it's understandable in this environment. And, it really comes from there's a couple of studies out there that really touch on this that have come out like in 2020 and through today. A couple that I wanted to just mention here. One study was from the National Committee on Responsive Philanthropy just this year. And I wanted to just read the stat where they looked at 25 different foundations and only 1% of grant making from those 25 foundations was specifically designated for Black communities, even though 15% of those cities, the populations are Black. 1% of funding was designated for something that's 15%. And the way that the dollars work out is those 25 foundations, if you average out the per person amount in the communities, was about $78, but only explicitly designated $6 per Black person in the community.
Wow.
So it's a huge disparity. And there's study after study that shows Black-led organizations get less revenue and with more strings attached. This is documented. It's one thing for me to share my story about witnessing the amounts of money we got and the expectations about what we would deliver, and then seeing other well-established organizations that have been doing this work for a long time, during which time the disparities have persisted with very few questions asked or accountability. And so just another study that, and we can provide links to these, from the Bridgespan Group, which is a nonprofit kind of think tank and supporter, and Echoing Green in 2020 did a study, and they found that Black-led organizations had 24% less average 24% less average revenue and 76% less unrestricted net assets. So I want to emphasize unrestricted net assets. So not only just the money available to them that came in, but the money after expenses. Unrestricted assets and funds in the nonprofit world are like gold.
Yeah, it is gold.
And what that means is that you can use it for whatever you need to do to accomplish what you're doing in your organization.
Staff development.
And that's a very big thing in the funding community, is want to fund programs and meals and supplies, but we don't want to fund your operational staff. And so one of the biggest challenges that Black-led nonprofits have is you don't have the capital to have a receptionist, for example, on staff full-time that's going to support the whole organization, or a director of finance, or a fundraiser, or
a full-time researcher,
or a full-time researcher,
or a PhD level researcher who can help to capture what you've done and use anecdotal and empirical data to share that information.
And so you can't compete.
You can't.
And it's kind of that vicious cycle of organizations say, well, you don't have the infrastructure to support this amount of money, but you can't develop the infrastructure because you don't have that amount of money. And so you stay stuck in, pigeonholed in this lane where funders can point at you and say, well, we don't trust that you can actually do what you say you're going to do. The other amazing thing that I saw from the inside out is how much work we did inside Nehemiah and Nehemiah's program directors did with pennies.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the way that, and an interesting thing is when the pandemic hit, Black-led organizations mobilized immediately because that's what they had been doing the whole time.
Right.
Meeting crisis, getting food to people, supporting rent, and supporting people in hard times, whereas other white-led organizations had to take 2-3 months to develop strategies and procedures and figure out the legal implications while people were starving and getting sick and dying.
And these stories are these kinds of stories about these systems that are put in place that make it more difficult for Black communities to thrive, or to capture data on our communities, or to state what needs to happen in order to change our communities. All of these barriers that we're talking about makes it seem as if we have no solutions to offer. But if we say, well, I just want to create one more after-school program or one more backpack with school supplies in it or one more transportation voucher, that makes sense. You can measure it. You can put a cost to it. But we were doing something that was so intangible and so unique and so on point that I don't think people knew what box to put that in. But it really helped to set us apart because then we started capturing data on what was going on, and we taught people the truth about these things. So when I had this vision to create a U.S. Black History course and say, Karen, this is what we want to do. If people know how we got here, I think they'll function differently than just hitting guilt.
That's right.
So that first group that we just wanted 75 people, and I pushed for 100, kept growing, and now it's almost 5,000 people. It's not only talk about the history of the treatment of Black people, but the history of whiteness.
That's right.
In America, when America became white. I jokingly asked you, when did you become white? But America wasn't always white.
It wasn't. It was a very carefully defined term.
It was very carefully defined. I mean, it started off as being Native American, but it became a social construct that had a lot of power and political, finessing, inside of it. So we help people to understand this because then, if you really want to help, you need to understand these issues. And that's how that huge stack of hundreds and hundreds of cards went down to maybe 75.
That's right.
Because then we started saying to people, if you want to be a part of change, particularly as we got into the pandemic, educate, donate, affiliate, follow Black-led organizations, donate to Black-led organizations, educate yourselves on the issues. Because I think so many people are so used to being told what to do. And I think one of the things I wanted to ask you just jokingly is how sick and tired have you gotten by people saying, hey, Dr. Reece, could you just create a list? We're joking about this earlier in the studios. If you just created a list, hey, this is what you need to do for, what we need to do for the Latino community, the Latinx community, or the Native American community, the indigenous communities, the Black communities. Just give us a little list of stuff so we can just pick and choose.
Tell us what we should do.
Tell us what we should do.
Yeah, we hear that over and over again. And I understand it. I mean, we all want, we want to feel like we're doing something. We want to do the right thing. But if there was a list of ways to fix this, we would have fixed it a long time ago.
Exactly.
So, part of it is putting in that work of figuring out what the solutions are. And to do that, we have to figure out what the problem is. And if you don't understand the root of a problem, you can't possibly anticipate any solutions.
Right.
And that's what's caused these disparities to persist for so long, is because people who are so far removed from the problem have decided that they know how to solve it. And time again, we see millions of dollars put into what people call solutions that don't work.
Right.
And no one is held accountable for that. And we don't go back to the drawing board and say, why didn't it work? Let's reconfigure. Our nonprofit funding structures and government funding structures are not set up for that, for us to test out an idea and then evaluate it and change it and make it so that it works. And how often do we as humans have an idea that works the first time?
Right.
Almost never. And so talking about that accountability, we really have to look at how data is collected and what kind of data is collected. It matters. And over the last couple of decades as a society, we've moved into focusing only on quantitative measures, so the things you can count: number of people that show up, percent of people who graduate, the scores on a test. And those are important,
Sure,
but they're not the only thing that matters. Qualitative research methods are just as important in these fields, and they're
harder, though, I bet.
They're more difficult. Well, they're more difficult to define, and sometimes more difficult to set up a way to measure it. And it's so important because in the data that we're collecting with these traditional members, like, how many from a reentry program are placed in employment, what we really miss is the depth of the success factors, like, how did my mindset change? Did I deal with my emotional trauma?
Right.
Do I trust people now? Do I feel prepared? And if you don't include that in your analysis, you're missing a giant chunk of what it takes to be successful. And so one of the things that
Absolutely.
we did early on was push back hard against the expectation that we would track some of those numerical factors
Sure
for
did.
a program that had a year. We had a year to complete what we said we were going to do. And so, we just said we that's not appropriate for this kind of project. Here's what we can tell you.
Sure. Because you can count heads or butts in seats, but you can pay people to come. You can give them
That's right.
meal tickets or whatever people have been given to come to things, supermarket gift cards or what have you. But the depth of change is a great measurement. Again, it's trickier to set
Right.
up, and so we made it easier to measure the things that you can quantify.
And we see quantitative data manipulated often. So, I'm not saying anybody out there is intending to lie per se. I think some groups are. But, if someone drops out of your program, do you count that in your total who enrolled? Or because they quit, do you take that out of the total? And the number of dropouts is telling you something. That's also relevant for the school district. If people drop out of school or transfer to a different district, how are we capturing that? And so just because it's quantitative doesn't mean that it's accurate truth. Those numbers can be manipulated and spun also.
So again, as we bring this Black-led movement on the scene and we're having people think differently about our approach to programming, because we're not just trying to fix Black people, we have data, from a dissertation about the trickiness or the bias that comes into play when Black-led, Latinx-led organizations are trying to raise money for their kinds of programming. I've had a funder come to me who said, after sitting in these circles, I realize that your efforts are evaluated differently than white-led organizations. I knew that, but to hear someone say that to me, now, that doesn't mean that they said anything. They just came back and told me.
That's right.
True ally needs to go tell the white people and fix the system, which is why we're not going to give you a list of stuff to do.
Exactly.
Somehow you got to realize, all right, that's your battle. I can't go in there and say, I know what y'all said about me. I know what's going on. But then you have a different method or a different bias when it comes to even making funding decisions, and then how you evaluate the work. And we're up against a whole lot of this. But I think because we knew where it was going, we became very strategic. So remember when you organized the ripple effect
Yes.
study? Now, that was sort of different. I didn't know if I fully got it, but as it started working, I was blown away by the impact of our work. Can you just talk a little bit about what a ripple effect study is and how it played out in our programming?
Yeah, so ripple effects mapping is a qualitative evaluation technique, and it focuses on not just the direct result that happened within a program, but once a person experiences a program, what effect does that have on them, their community, and the world around them? So you bring folks together. It's a collaborative experience. Bring folks in a room, and you ask certain questions. And so we did this based on our Black History for a New Day course, which was really central in the work that we were doing at the time. And ask questions about, what are some of the positives you took from this? What are some of the negatives?
Right.
What have you done as a result? What new groups are, new things are you doing? And people get into a conversation, and it's a very loosely structured time together because you want people to synergize in their conversations
Sure.
and figure out the connections. And then in the analysis, we make, looks almost like a genetic hierarchy, like when you draw your family tree.
Right.
But you start with the thing that happened, which was the class, and then you move out from there and draw lines like, this person talked to their HR department at work. This person started a book club, and then this other faith community participated in that book club. And then those participants came back and took the class originally, and you talk about the ripples that come off of that one thing that happened.
Is that sort of a newer measurement technique?
It's been around for a little while. I know in the sometime around 2014, 2015, I think it was becoming popular again. And there was actually a person that helped us do the first report, Mari Gassiorowitz, who is in Madison-Dade County Public Health, who organized a training on the method for a few different groups around here. And so that's how I found out about it and was able to bring it in to what we were doing.
So it's interesting. So you use someone who works inside public health
Yes.
to take a look at ripple effect mapping and our efforts. To me, that's just brilliant. How did you make that connection? As someone who, do they normally take a look at the impact of illness or disease and its impact on a society? Talk to me a little bit about the crossover between how public health may have used these kinds of things to detect illness.
Yeah, public health is changing these days. It, is really focused in the past on preventing disease, vaccinations, that sort of thing. And it's moved now more into what we call social determinants of health, which are things like the stress level that you have. What is the built environment? Can you walk to a grocery store? Can you go outside and play as a kid? What are these things around you that impact your health? Because it's not just physical or not just mental. And so, Madison-Dade County Public Health was starting to think this way at the time. And that was the connection when we had a focus area of justified anger called family and community wellness. And so we had some people that were part of writing the original Our Madison plan, like Lisa Payton Kerr and others connected with Alicia Stevenson at the time. And they asked, what can we do? How can we help? And what are some of the ideas for those Black women working in as part of certain systems? How can we make an impact there? And so that's really how the connection came about, was those folks that recognized justified anger and reached out to see what they could do and how we could work together.
It's really interesting. Once we started walking in a direction that we thought was appropriate and correct, we started finding these great resources, because I hadn't heard of other nonprofits using this ripple effect sort of study. I'm not saying that others didn't do it, but certainly when it came to issues that impact the Black community, I hadn't heard that approach. And again, we weren't mapping Black disease or issues going on in the Black community. We were really measuring the impact that our programming was having on non-Black people and the far-reaching effects of it. That was brilliant.
Our theory for that was that white people are perpetrating racism sometimes in the form of microaggressions, which is, thousands of death by 1,000 cuts as it's looked at it. And so if we could reduce the microaggressions, could that lessen stress due to racism? If we enlighten our white community, would that help to reduce that, thereby improving the health of Black communities?
And we presented that to the Wisconsin Partnership Program and were awarded a $1 million grant, because that was a unique approach, because I think a lot of people try to mitigate those stressors by just securing and supporting the Black folks. But we decided, no, that we're not responsible for those systems. We're not responsible for those pressures. We just have to respond to them. Let's talk to professors and nonprofit leaders and police officers and elected officials and judges. And that's who came to our programming, and that's who subjected themselves, availed themselves to our leadership, our instruction, our support, our coaching, our mentoring, which was really, really major. And it made what we were doing even more unique. It just seemed like the unique wrinkles of it unfolded each year. But $1 million grant paid out over 5 years allowed us to pour into emerging Black leaders, as well as train non-Black would-be allies.
Absolutely.
So that we could work on both sides of the equation, so that we were pouring into people who might bump into each other and create solutions together, at least having an impact on people who would think differently about these issues. And, this is 10 years looking back. And it wasn't what I thought when I wrote the article, and it wasn't what I thought when we had the town hall meeting or the rollout. But looking back, it was the right method. It was the right steps to take in order to really help people to think about what is the long game of systems change.
That's right.
My last question for you, Dr. Reece, is we're hitting the end of our time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. We worked together, known each other for decades, but I can just talk on and on about some of these things. What were some of the key insights that you received, maybe even about yourself, on this journey of being an ally as as we did this work, and if there were white people really acting up, or CEOs or folks who are really acting up, we're like, Karen, go get your people. Like we would kind of say, Karen, look, we don't have the energy to do this. Or you would offer and say, you know what, this is what allies have got to do. But you never acted like, I know it all, I understand it all, and then it's not like you became the voice of reason for Black people saying, let me tell you what y'all are feeling.
Right.
So how do you work so closely with Black leadership and in these issues, but continually check yourself so that you don't live into that Karen moniker, but you position yourself so that you really can be an ally by saying, my colleagues, my friends, my family, my bosses, they shouldn't have to take this on and let me say what needs to be said.
Right. Yeah. So for me, it's something that evolved over time. And so, I started attending Fountain of Life Church in 2001, and my in-laws were Black, and I only bring that up to say being immersed in community where I could make those mistakes, and I could, I had those moments at Fountain of Life where I was like, hey, I know what I'm talking about, let me in. And then I managed to arm my way in there and like, oh, wait, I don't know what I'm talking about at all.
Oops.
And so, but also being in an environment where, I am in true community and developing close relationships with people. And so there is that space where, people can tell me what I'm doing wrong. And then it's up to me, though, to stay and to get over myself and to figure it out. I mean, the biggest mistake people can make in the cross-cultural settings is when someone tells you this isn't right, this is harming people, for you to just sit with it for a while and figure out. Now, sometimes people come at you and it is bogus.
Sure.
But most of the time, there's going to be something that you can learn from it, and how can you do it differently next time? And so by the time I was, coming to work full time at Nehemiah, I'd at least been through some of that. I think it really does come to, what do you say you want to do? And do you really want to do that? And what does that mean for you personally? So, people that called out some of the evaluation methods or funding practices that told us about it, if they had said it to the powers that be, that might mean they might not get that funding for that cycle. What is the cost to you? And you have to be willing to pay that. You have to be willing to step aside, not get the shine sometimes.
Wow,
you don't need it all the time. It doesn't matter. If you're really doing this because you want to see things change, then it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And so for me, it really is multiple times per day doing that reflection. I've been in this work for a long time now.
Sure.
And it still is every single day, multiple times per day. Okay, is that coming in? Is the Karen in me coming out and taking over?
Sit down, Karen. Sit down.
Are my biases creeping in? Am I being assertive about this because I am right in this situation, or is it because I think I should be? Or is bringing in some sort of bias because I don't understand what's really happening here? And so it's about that. And being in a situation where you can have those conversations, and I can say to people, here's what I'm thinking about this. Can you help me understand, is this correct? Is this the way to approach it, or am I completely missing something? You have to ask that.
Definitely. And then you have to also ask, in a very visionary-led or influenced organization, is it right brain versus left brain? Is it because you're a researcher and you give thoughts to these issues? So some of them are not necessarily gender-based or race-based. It's just temperament and discipline, but to constantly be processing those things so that we don't over-racialize scenarios, but that we don't under-racialize them either when that needs to happen. That's an interesting phenomenon. And I'm sure people who come through our history class who interact with you and your great team or see you may think, man, if I could just get hired by a Black organization so that I can have that type of diversity every day, that would fix everything. But they don't understand the work that it takes to be a true ally, to be a true partner, and to really grow. You're an example that it can happen, that it can work. and that people can value your input and what you have to say and value what you've done. But as you mentioned several times a day, you're still checking things because that doesn't go away just because you're an insider.
I don't think it ever goes away. And if you think it went away, it probably didn't. It means you
That's
should
how
probably
people
step
step
it back
in
up.
That's how people get in trouble. Wow. Listen, Dr. Reece, I really appreciate your time. This conversation has been so exciting, and particularly in the context of looking back over 10 years, because it's easy to say, Dr. G wrote an article and then this movement happened. But no, there are thoughts and reports and interviews and all of these things that we had to capture, corrections.
That's right.
That we had to do, checking Black people, checking white people, checking folks who are neither Black nor white, saying, well, how do we play into this? Creating a history class, but having white participants say, well, we thought Black people were going to be here.
That's
really?
right.
You thought we were going to bring Black people up here so you could practice your sensitivity?
That's another
on that?
podcast.
That's another podcast. Where are the Black people? And so I really appreciate your input and your journey, and that you've been able to watch this trajectory, and that this has helped to place us in different space. Nehemiah in different space. Nehemiah Justified Anger in different space in the community. How we are thought of now as not only thought leaders, but people who can document what we say we're going to do and share that information back to the community. So your role and your partnership and that braininess that you bring to us has really helped us, as well as the heart to understand these issues. So listen, folks, this is a great privilege to be able to sit and listen to such a real dialogue from people who respect each other, who work with each other, because we also want you to know that it is possible for these kinds of relationships, work and personal and otherwise, to really be successful. But you need to listen to the subtext and read between the lines and understand that the work that it takes to maintain these kinds of things. And so, with each episode, I ask you to listen, then listen again. I ask you to consider and deeply ponder on what you've heard, be touched by, be transformed by it, repost it, write a comment, write a review, share it with people who want to be allies in any of this information. But then also subscribe so that you get a notice every time I drop something that's new, and click that Patreon link so that you can become one of our supporters. Because there's one thing to listen to this great podcast, but it's another thing to say we want you to be here for the long term, and we want you to reach more people. All right. So I want you to become that change that you really want to see in our world. So lean in, share, support, and then show up again when we drop our next episode. This has been Dr. Alex G. And thank you so much, listeners, for being the best part of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. Take care.
Black like me. Black like me.
I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. When I first imagined doing this podcast, I thought about myself with my iPhone sitting in a room in my house, just sort of doing this all on my own. But you know what? The reason why we've won awards and the reason why we have over 200 episodes up is because I have a brilliant team who helps me to make this podcast what it is. So let me take a moment and thank Jeremy and Eli, who are my editors and producers extraordinaire, Jakisha, who handles marketing. If you like that opening track of our theme song, you can show your appreciation to Corey Saffold, who created that and produced it, and Marcus Fleming, my cousin, who's on vocals. I also want to say that this podcast was started with the generous support of the Human Family Unity Foundation, and so we always want to stop and thank them for that. For the many patrons who support us through our Patreon page, thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't just listen, but you support, you lean in, and you help this podcast to be what it is. And then I need to thank you, the listeners, who make a point of downloading this, listening to it, and sharing it. Without all of you, this podcast would not be what it is and what it's becoming. Thank you so much.
Black like me.